Welcome to Lawline with your host, David Schneerman, an accomplished entrepreneur, attorney, and legal educator. Each week, Lawline will bring you the most knowledgeable experts in the field of law, business, and education. And now we introduce our guest and our host, David Schneerman.
Welcome to Lawline. With the recent reports of bullying and cyberbullying in today's society, it seems like it's becoming more prevalent in our school systems. Today we will look at the problems of bullying and possible solutions. Our guest is Dr. Stuart Green, Director and Founder of the New Jersey Coalition for Bullying and Awareness and Prevention. Stuart, thank you for being here.
Sure, thank you, David.
So the subject of bullying, that's something that has been going around since the beginning of time. Before we get into what's going on today, let's just talk about bullying by itself.
Sure.
What do you define as bullying, and why do you think it actually happens in our society?
Okay. Well, the way we define bullying academically is it's a pattern of negative acts, typically peer-to-peer, but it could be adult to child, or and it involves a pattern of negative acts, rarely one, although it can be one egregious act. There's an imbalance of power between the target and the person or people hurting them, so that it's difficult for the targeted person to defend himself or herself, and that could be just a numbers game, or against one, or a difference in strength or athleticism or popularity or anything. And often the person targeted is a member of a minority group in that setting. So imbalance of power, pattern of negative acts, and there's an intention to harm on the part of the people doing the hurting.
Why do you think, or what does it say about our society that it seems like everywhere you look, there's always bullies? Why do you, who is this bully, or who are the bullies, and why does it happen in society?
Bullying primarily occurs because of the characteristics of social institutions. In the case of kids, if we focus on that, bullying primarily arises and is sustained by the characteristics of the school or other institution, could be a youth facility, a lot of bullying goes on there, in which kids find themselves. And less so, some bullying arises because of characteristics of individuals, but that's what we call an outlier.
That's fascinating, actually. I did not expect that answer.
Oh.
I thought you were going to say it has to do with the individual, and there's people who just get caught up or insecure, and you're saying it has to do with the environment that they're in that creates bullies.
Sure. And part of that environment is the way people who run the environment and are primarily responsible for how it functions, their behavior. So we talk about bullying arising primarily because of adult modeling of bullying behavior in their relationships, for example, if we're talking about schools again, in their relationships with kids, and also in their relationships with each other, inadequate attention to the issue on the part of adults. These are the primary causes of bullying.
Certainly when you're in a school, like you said, it's a minority or a minority group or somebody who's different, whether it be somebody who has Tourette's or somebody who is learning disabled. When it comes to bullying, is there usually one person in another group that rallies everybody else? Just how it arises. Certainly there's somebody to blame who's the individual or the student who takes advantage of something.
Yeah.
And why do you see that? Is there certain characteristics of that person that you see are similar among bullies in different schools throughout the country?
It's hard to find a common personality for kids who do harm to other kids. It's all over the map. There is some evidence that if you took 100 kids who regularly bully other kids in this corner of the room and 100 kids who never bully in this corner of the room, you would find some differences in baseline empathy, for example, and certain characteristics are associated with kids who bully, more often smoking or drinking, or certainly doing less well academically than they're capable of.
Certainly.
Things like that, but not enough to primarily explain the behavior. In fact, we know that if kids with a propensity toward doing harm are in a school environment where the adult modeling is very strong and positive,
Sure.
and where the culture and climate are very strong in terms of supporting and including isolated or minority kids, those very kids, for the most part, won't bully.
To some degree, you're saying if the kids are paid attention to and they give positive reinforcement. Charter schools are great examples where you see a lot of positive reinforcement versus potentially a school where there's not enough faculty, there's not enough attention left to the kids, and at the end of the day, the kids are left on their own. So what does the kid do? They act up, and who do they act up against? Somebody who's weaker. Does that kind of sound?
You could say that, but I don't really agree with the characterization, the distinction between the charter schools and the public schools, or the implication that, in public schools you're going to have bullying because there isn't enough staff to pay attention to the kids.
Okay.
First of all, there is enough staff to pay attention to the kids in all schools, depending on how you define enough staff. But the fact is, it's not the number of staff that are there, but the kinds of behaviors that they generate all day long.
For example?
Well, in most schools, charter or public, there isn't enough attention paid to these issues of how warmly or how inclusively or how protectively or how engaging adults are with kids. A lot of schools feel just like a workplace. Like, school culture is how we do things here, and then climate is sort of how the place feels. And in a lot of school buildings, there's a real atmosphere of sort of, it's just business, it's just a workplace. It isn't a warm, engaging enough environment. And adults are capable of making that happen. It's not just a numbers game. So it's not a lack of numbers, it's a lack of prioritizing and understanding these issues. The other thing is, even if you had a school where there weren't as many staff as you would like, schools are capable of engaging the community and engaging parents to, participate in this. After about 4th grade or so in this country, other countries as well, but let's focus on this one, parents disappear from schools. Right. Until 3rd grade, 4th grade, they're all over the schools. Then around 4th grade or so, 5th grade, they disappear. Sure. And when you ask administrators, which I do all the time, I don't see too many parents around, why aren't they here? They blame the parents typically. They're not interested, they're doing 2 jobs, there's some truth in that, they don't want to be here. And I even hear some people say, and the kids don't want them here.
Sure.
Which, who cares? Like, everything we do is what the kids want us to do. And the fact is that schools, most schools, are tremendously under-engaged with the community, and don't do enough to basically flood the school with parents who are available.
It's fascinating what you're talking about in regards to the schools, because we're talking about a subject of bullying, and really you're getting into the whole big picture of some of the fundamental issues of the education system. A lack of, as you said, creative involvement from the administrators to try to do something that's better for the kids. And one of them, when it comes to bullying, has to do with parent involvement. So to some degree, what you're saying is bullying is going to happen regardless.
Yeah, most bullying can be prevented. That's why when people sort of respond to the new New Jersey law and get very focused on all the incidents, that they have to investigate and report. Well, if you wait for incidents to occur, you are going to be overwhelmed very quickly.
In 2010, in Rutgers, Tyler Clementi committed suicide after one of his roommates videotaped him having sex with another guy and put that online. And he said to his family he just couldn't take it anymore. This takes bullying to a whole nother level. Not only is it in a social area, but now they've taken a video and they put it online for the whole world to see. What do you know about that incident, and how does the social media aspect change the game as it did with him, so to prevent such terrible things from happening again?
The Clemente incident served, it became a sort of spur in New Jersey for some good things after a tragedy. But it's not a typical, in some ways it wasn't a typical incident of bullying,
of course.
which typically have long histories to them, months to years, patterns of negative acts.
One thing to certainly take from that is the power of online media, and in this case it was a video. In other cases it can be using Facebook or other social media platforms to continue your bullying in person. What do you see is going on right now in the school systems with social media and cyberbullying?
Two things. One is the myth about social media sites and cyberbullying, which is that it's only occurring in some electronic space, in cyberspace. And in fact, most of the hurtful behavior that goes on in electronic realms is related to relationships in the real world.
Sure, of course.
In kids, youth who know each other from the same buildings and the same communities, just as in the Clemente case. You know, those were literally kids who were living together. The other thing is, when kids engage in hurtful behavior against somebody who's of a minority, say gay, the main reason that that's happening is not because of some, evil characteristic primarily within the hearts of the kids doing the harm. It's primarily because the social environment, in this case the institution, in the case of Tyler Clemente, Rutgers itself, as they've acknowledged in some ways, was not doing enough before that to ensure that the university was an adequately supportive place in terms of the population of lesbian and gay and transgender kids that attend the school. So, and that's primarily when kids get hurt, why they're getting hurt. It's because the school is not being active or strong enough in terms of proactively, in advance of any incidents, providing adequate affirmation and support and inclusion, taking official stances in favor of those kids, but to that population.
To some degree, I think that's just part of the overall problem in general, that schools are, there's a lot that they're not doing right. There's a lot of energy, the education system in general, there's just a lot going on and not a lot of energy putting into it. Certainly this is one area that is going to fall on the wayside because they're not getting a lot of other things right. So to some degree, it's hard to just put it on the schools, because certainly somebody who makes fun of somebody for being gay or something to that degree and humiliates them, they have to take responsibility for that. And we can't take that away from them. And there has to be a consequence.
That responsibility notion is very overdone and unscientific in some fundamental ways. It has to do with this notion of what psychologists call attribution theory, which is the tendency we all have to look for the cause of everything that happens in life as rooted within us as individuals, our makeup, our traits, our standing characteristics. And in fact, most behavior that occurs in human life occurs because of the characteristics of the environments that we find ourselves in, the state of the nation, the state of the schools, the state of the institutions that we live our lives in. In the case of schools, for example, just to focus, since you mentioned Tyler Clemente, on gay and lesbian and transgender kids, every school has kids in it who are exploring gender identity, or who are gay and lesbian or transgender and out, or at least know they are. And the question becomes, what in that school, in the functioning of that school day to day, is affirming or supportive of kids who are gay, lesbian, and transgender? Most schools in this country, including probably a majority of the schools in New Jersey, do not have a gay-straight alliance, do not participate in activities sponsored by GLSEN, the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network. There's no participation in No Name Calling Week or Day of Silence, which are affirmative activities for those populations. There's no mentor in the school. There's no teacher or teachers who, even if they're not out, are very well identified and known to be supportive mentors for that community. The way kids who are gay and lesbian sometimes talk about it is the school has no pink. In other words, you don't have a sense in terms of school climate that this is a place where being gay and lesbian or transgender is okay, is supported, is acknowledged. There's no proactive education on these issues. It's not touched on in curriculum.
The law that was passed in New Jersey, why was it passed? What statement is it making? And what are the schools saying about it? Are they happy that it's there now that they can use it? What's the reaction?
The law was passed because advocates, community organizations, parents of children who are hurt, and other parents of other children who understand how important this is to their own children, even if they weren't specifically targeted, understand and want schools to prioritize this issue more, to understand how fundamental it is to what it means to be an educator and to have a school. And fundamentally, that's what the law is. It's a statement by society that this issue is really important and needs to be addressed more vigorously by every school in New Jersey. Schools themselves, many administrators and staff are perfectly fine with this. They want to prioritize this more. There are some who primarily experience it as a burden. We argue from an advocacy point of view that they're entitled to feel that way, but they don't really get it. They don't get how fundamental this is to the functioning of schools and the growth and development of students in schools.
So two things that you touched on that I'd like to kind of explore. One, the first thing you said is this is not retribution or someone is responsible. You said it's more about society as a norm and how things are set up. But if you use that argument, you can use that argument with anything. How can I ever have that conversation? You're like, well, society is not set up the right way, and I would agree with you. I would agree. Look what's going on in general.
We're talking about strategy here, about what works. Most people, no matter how distressed they are in their societal position, are not going out and committing violent crimes. It's a tremendous minority, of all people who do those things. And the same thing is true with these issues, even in the schools. Yes, there are some kids who have conduct disorder. There are some kids who have sociopathy. There are some kids in such terrible family situations that they're expressing this at school. But that's a minority of the kids who do harm. Now, I'm not saying that when a kid does harm, or when an adult does harm, that there shouldn't be consequences. I'm not saying don't use that sort of consequences and responsibility construct. But if you want to impact these issues, you have to impact them in a societal way. There's a notion in psychology, which we now well understand, which has to do with how people change. It's called the trans-theoretical model. Doesn't matter, right? How people change. And how
do people change? Tell me.
Well, we know from this work that most people, in regard to any given behavior, are what we call pre-contemplators. They're not envisioning or thinking of making a change in their behavior, whatever it is, smoking, drinking, weight, any issue you want to name. We've studied 12 different ones. Within the next 6 months, that's how we define a pre-contemplator. What works to move pre-contemplators further along the line toward changing is what we call consciousness raising or environmental manipulation. I can be very concrete. If you want to get people to stop smoking or stop smoking, increase the tax on cigarettes, reduce the number of places people can smoke, and in all kinds of concrete and word ways, advertising or whatever, make clear that this is something that people are doing less of and that society doesn't want people to do.
Do you believe anyone pretty much in school, let's say, is capable of bullying given the right circumstances? Or most people? Most people?
I wouldn't say anyone. But I'd say that we're all capable of hurtful behavior. Most of us are not going to turn that into a pattern of negative acts that's very harmful to particular individuals. But the fact is, about 30% of kids in a school are involved in bullying actively, harming other kids and being harmed by them. We usually use a figure 8 to 10% because it's so low. You can't even argue against it. But what that means in real terms is that if you have a 400-kid middle school, you have about 40 to 50 of those kids, 400, 500 kids school, who are having a horrible time. For most of those kids, they're repeatedly targeted, the worst day of their lives every day they go to school. And it's unconscionable on the part of especially those who run the schools and the rest of us who are advocates to let that happen. And if you're going to address it, you need to impact and strengthen and make more positive the culture and climate of the school. If you just spend all of your resources and time going after the outliers, the kids at the tail end of the curve who have the conduct disorders and the sociopathy, you are not going to get most of those kids to change.
Certainly it makes sense on paper. The hard part obviously is making it happen, and we can get into that in a minute. I just have a question regarding to the person who's being bullied, the student who's being bullied. Certainly that's the worst thing for a parent, to have a kid come home, especially in K through 12, and know that they're being bullied. And you watch movies or made-for-home movies where it says, next time you're bullied, hit the kid in the face. Fight back, and that won't happen. How do you recommend handling a situation? And is fighting back the right move?
First of all, kids often, majority of kids, won't tell adults about this. They'll actually tell adults in school less than they'll tell folks at home, and they're not telling folks at home that much. And the reason they don't is because they get advice like that. And that's what we call the fundamental error of attribution. Thinking that this is something entirely in the control of the individual and not a function of the environment that they're in. And also, what that point of view mistakes is it misunderstands how much suffering a kid who's getting targeted is going through. Kids getting targeted are absolutely desperate about it. They think about it all day. They think about it at night. They think about it when they're going to sleep. They pray to God about it. Known a lot of kids who do that. And when the next day things are still the same, a lot of kids lose faith. Not just in us as adults, parents and school folks, but spiritually as well. Kids with special health and learning needs are one of those often targeted minority population. There are kids with autism, all along the spectrum, Asperger's, who get targeted. How much of a change in their interpersonal relations, in response to advice from a parent, are they suddenly going to engage in to the point that it gets them included, protected, supported, improves their relationships? It's first of all, when you make these kinds of suggestions to kids, basically what you're doing is you're inevitably implying to them that they are the cause of their problem. It's like saying to the kid, if only you were different, this wouldn't be happening. It's almost like agreeing that you were targeted because of the way you are. You're too emotionally expressive. You're too sensitive. You're too shy. You're too weak. You don't fight back. You don't stand up for yourself. There are misguided advocates out in the community on this issue, including some who are making money on this, who are going around advising kids that the thing they ought to do if you're targeted is laugh about it, or pretend it doesn't hurt you and make friends, with the kids who are hurting you. If that can work, fine. But why should kids who don't or have difficulty doing those things remain targeted?
I want to speak to the parents who's hearing all this and agrees with what you're saying. Mm-hmm. The student comes to them, their child comes to them and says, I'm being bullied, I need help, or I'm being bullied, what should I do? What does that parent do?
First and foremost, kids need to feel like it was okay to talk about it. They need to be praised for bringing it up. They need to, ideally, there has to be a supportive relationship between them and their parents so they don't get sort of further hurt by having revealed this, by getting that implication that there's something wrong with them. The parent has to be careful about listening to the child, including about listening to what the child thinks would be helpful in regard to this, and understanding what the problem is. Almost most incidents reveal something about the culture and the climate of a school. If a kid is being targeted because they're perceived as gay, and by the way, whether they're gay or not, who cares? But if a kid is perceived as gay, and that's the basis on which they're being targeted, that says something potentially really important about the culture and climate of that school and the extent to which it's adequately supporting kids who are differently, and different in terms of gender identity. Schools are responsible within the confines of that school building, and a little beyond it too, for knowing that that's the case and for making sure in advance, before incidents ever happen, that that school culture is strengthened in terms of its affirmation and support for those kids.
I want to get back to the answer. So you give feedback, you give positive reinforcement.
You're supportive, non-blaming, non-judgmental. You listen, and then you try to get some understanding from the child themselves of what they think would be helpful. So, as an adult that what really would be helpful is to make sure that the school is on board in addressing this issue.
So contact the school.
Yes, you want your kid to be okay with that, but in any case, you want to be able to do that.
Really, when you first came out here, Stuart, I wanted to talk about bullying and what bullying is and how to deal with the people who bully and what the consequences are of that and how to change that. And really what you brought out in the show was more of a bigger picture of how society and how schools handle bullies and why it's not about the outliers. And that's all you think about when you think of a bully. You think of the outliers. And it's clear that it's more of a getting more involved and it's the bigger picture and changing it from the beginning. So I really appreciate you opening that dialogue up.
A huge number of kids in our schools can't identify a single staff person who cares about them as a person, makes an effort to know them, and that's called lack of engagement of that student in school. That factor is huge in explaining school dropout rates, lack of academic performance. So schools need to do more to support, protect, include, engage kids. Kids, every school knows it has some kids who are, neurologically different, not neurotypical. Sure. A kid with Tourette's, for example, would be an example we use a lot. Partly because the New Jersey Center for Tourette Syndrome, one of the strongest Tourette's organizations in the country, really gets this issue. And then every school knows you have some kids who are going to tick, who are going to engage in behaviors that are not even voluntary. What kind of proactive education does the school do around those issues?
So that's a good subject, and we're out of time for today, but that's something that I would love to take for a next program and really kind of go through that a little bit more and maybe put together a program that we can put online in education. But really, the best part about it was understanding that it's, how to work with your child if they are being bullied, and looking at the society problem. It can't be solved, obviously, in one show, but it's putting things on the right path, and clearly you're doing a lot of good things. So thank you so much for joining us, Stuart.
Sure.
Once again, I want to thank you for watching Lawline. We'll be here same time next week.
You've been watching Lawline with your host, David Schnurman. Mr. Schnurman will be back with you next week at the same time.